that this is moving. Okay, yeah. Fine.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Jenny Pickerel, and we've also got Kirsten Stevenswood. We co-organise the Intentional Communities Research Network, and we are running a seminar series. Kirsten's been running them for many years, and we're running one for 6 monthly sessions in 2026, and this is our second one. So we're very excited, and we're very excited to have you here. There are also further links to our programme. I've just put that in the chat, so you can see future programme as well that we've got ahead. And there's always an invite here. We're very much academics exploring intentional communities, though we hope to attract a broad audience. So if you have topics that you want to be discussed, or you would like to give a talk, or you know someone you'd like to hear a talk from, then just drop me or Kirsten a line, and there's contact details through the website. So we are exploring what academics are working with intentional communities in different ways around some different themes. And we tend to have a talk of about 45 minutes and then a Q&A. So what I would encourage you to do is, once I've handed over to the speaker, if you could just mute while the speaker's talking, but obviously do make any notes of questions that you'd like. And I would like to introduce Dimitra from the University of Sheffield, who's nearly completed her PhD, where she's been exploring happiness in Greek eco-communities. For me, what's really interesting is she's been exploring the felt experience of happiness, not just how is it defined or how is it created, but what constitutes happiness in and of itself. And there's a huge variety of different elements that Dimitra has been exploring as to how we could understand it, and then perhaps see how that might be replicated in other places as well. So on that note, I would like to hand over to you, Dimitra, and talk for roughly 45 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. As Jenny already said, my name is Dimitra Philiohou, and while I am a PhD researcher in geography at the University of Sheffield, my research actually sits in the intersection of human geography and psychology, and is focusing on a question that has captivated me for over a decade. What is the relationship between happiness and eco-community lifestyles? My thesis has a strong element of autoethnographical research. So to honor my positionality, I'm going to start by a brief introduction about me and how this research came to be conceived. So before I became an academic researcher, I was spending many years moving between the conventional urban world and the experimental spaces of eco-communities. And this dual positioning as both an insider and outsider, and as a participant and observer, has profoundly shaped not only my research design, but also the questions that I conceived about investigating. So my journey into eco-communities began in the summer of 2011 when I visited my first eco-community in Italy, which was a village of wooden houses that is nestled in the Apennine Mountains and are called the Alps, after Tolkien's vision of harmonious living with nature. That week transformed my understanding of what was possible, and I felt that I had discovered some kind of utopia that I could only imagine in my dreams. This experience led me to arrange a 6-month Erasmus internship at Sunset Desert Technology in Spain. However, as the months went by, I found that the initial bliss of being there gave way to a feeling of suffocation and eagerness to leave by the end of my internship. This pattern of being drawn to this lifestyle, yet unable to settle in an eco-community for long, kept repeating itself for the following years. And this was a paradox that actually began to haunt me. What was it about eco-communities that initially filled me so completely, yet there was something missing that made long-term stay so difficult? As the turnover of communities I visited increased, to no avail of finding one that I was comfortable to stay long term, that also raised the fundamental question: is it practically possible to combine the positive elements of both eco community and conventional lifestyles, leaving out the negatives, and thus to live happily ever after? Is there any kind of lifestyle that can be both ethical and sustainable while also promoting genuine human flourishing? With these questions in mind, I decided to embark on a research journey to find some answers. So these personal questions resonated with two profound global crises. First, there is the climate emergency. We know definitely that human activity is destroying our planet's ecosystem. And secondly, there is the mental health crisis. Despite unprecedented material wealth in developed nations, we are experiencing historic levels of unhappiness. And according to the United Nations, depression ranks first worldwide as a cause of years lost due to disability and is projected to be the leading global burden amongst all diseases by 2030. This dual crisis exposes a fundamental contradiction in our current development paradigm. Economic growth has long been equated with societal prosperity, with measures such as GDP established for ranking nations. Yet we see increasing prevalence of mental health conditions in nations with high GDP. For example, in 2015, the UK ranked fifth worldwide in economy size, yet 23% of its population was estimated to be directly affected by mental health conditions. This reinforces a wave of dissent expressed since the 1970s that criticizes economic growth for not being a reliable prosperity indicator. There is a growing realization of the necessity to develop post-consumeristic values and lifestyles that enable us to combine high quality of life with measurably reduced resource use. This is where eco-communities become profoundly relevant. They are characterized by this alternative approach, and yet they remain severely understudied. By critically examining the links between environmental sustainability, consumption, integrated community lifestyles, and happiness, my research findings can demonstrate ways of enhancing the quality of life, mental health, and creative output for wider society members. Um, so, to start with, my main concept my main concept that the research is focused on, eco-communities. Just to give a brief, I am sure that mostly everyone here has some understanding of what eco-communities are, but just a brief summary. The concept traces back to the counterculture movements of the 1960s, when activists envisioned the creation of small-scale egalitarian communities that would function as laboratories for birthing a new society. Dawson in 2013 identifies the difficulty enclosed in framing an eco-community definition, attributing it to the phenomenon's diversity. This has been fundamental for my research design, which I will explain in more details further. Research on eco-villages has so far been principally focused on practical innovations and technological advantages that explain how they achieve their low-impact living rather than on well-being, which, despite some scholars beginning to address in recent years, remains a significant gap. So just to present a little bit of the gaps in our knowledge about eco-communities and happiness, from the limited studies that exist on happiness-related terms, so a lot of the research on eco-communities uses terms such as quality of life, well-being, buen vivir, and I think that was it. Several concerning patterns emerge that are missing from this research. First, many studies paint a utopian portrayal of eco-communities. So critical evaluation is not is very rarely present. Secondly, there is a critical sampling bias. Only current residents participate in the data. These are individuals more likely to be found happy in this lifestyle, as opposed to ex-residents whose voices are not heard. This creates a survivorship bias that fundamentally skews our understanding of the lived experience of eco-community life. Thirdly, most studies are from affluent and more stable country contexts where eco-communities are shown to be a middle-class pursuit. In this context, eco-communities represent lifestyle choices made from positions of relative privilege. Um, Now, the main lens through which I am looking at eco-communities is that of happiness, and happiness is a notoriously difficult concept to define and measure. Many scholars from various disciplines have developed theories about the pursuit and achievement of the good life, resulting in numerous independent and sometimes contradicting approaches. Current happiness research is mostly dominated by two main paradigms. The first one is hedonism, which equates happiness with pleasure and joy. And the second one is eudaimonia, which associates happiness with long-term fulfillment, meaning, and living according to values. Each of these two paradigms comes with distinctive measurement approaches and significant critiques. So to present a little bit about some of these theories under each of these paradigms, in psychology, which is the main discipline that occupies itself with happiness, Diener's subjective well-being scale, following the hedonic tradition, is by far the most widely used measure, where participants answer questions like how happy are you with your life on Likert type scales. Um, Rive's psychological well-being theory, following the eudaimonic tradition, focuses on 6 factors: autonomy, environmental mastery, personal growth, positive relations with others, purpose in life, and self-acceptance. Economists, um, belonging to the second discipline that mostly dedicates itself with the study of happiness, have also developed their own measures. Um, a very popular model is Layard's Big Seven, identifying family relationships, financial situation, work, community and friends, health, personal freedom, and personal values as happiness determinants. And another very popular theory is that of sense, uh, named the capabilities approach, that emphasizes freedom to live a full life, leading to the Human Development Index that measures health, education, and living standards. The most widely cited studies on communities where happiness or related concepts are central use quantitative approaches that provides a statistical biases for generalization. However, these approaches face significant critiques. Firstly, there is a self-report bias, especially without triangulation to strengthen findings. Secondly, Critical happiness study scholars accuse the widely used happiness measurement of being a concept constructed by and used for advancing the cause of capitalism and neoliberalism, maximizing profit and driving economic growth, shifting attention away from socioeconomic causes of misery and absolving those in power from responsibility. There fits my choice to adopt the geographical approach to the study of happiness that emphasizes the geographical approach to the study of well-being, because traditionally geography does not actually study happiness. But I borrow their approach, I borrow geography's approach towards well-being to study happiness here. This approach emphasizes place, space, and context, which are dimensions often neglected in psychological and economic approaches. Geographical work examines how socioeconomic factors such as health status, social relations, sense of community, and environmental factors such as climate and place characteristics affect well-being across and within countries. A second criticism facing the mainstream happiness research comes from anthropology scholars who have long spoken against the use of one-size-fits-all surveys to measure and compare happiness across cultures. They highlight the importance of ethnographic methods to extract the meaning-making of particular groups, noting that different cultures use different terms for happiness and attribute different meanings to it. Most happiness theories and literature reflect the culture from which they stem, which is predominantly the United States, that is the home of positive psychology, raising questions about whether these theories can be universally relevant. Eco-community residents are a distinct group, and applying theories and measurements stemming from and research in more conventional settings to radically alternative contexts is highly problematic. For this reason, I chose not to include any of the popular pre-existing theories on happiness to allow the specificities of my group of participants to emerge. At the same time, though, I still contend that happiness is also highly a subjective experience, and psychological perspectives remain important as part of my approach, and I adopt some key concepts that facilitate the analytical presentation of different characteristics attributed to happiness meaning-making, while still honoring the geographical contextual emphasis. To start with, agency, subjectivity, and identity are used to describe how eco-commoners position themselves, tell their life stories, and experience their capacity to act. Agency is used in this approach, and subjectivity is understood as relational and embodied, somewhat porous and mutually affective, in line with post-humanist understandings, but with a steady core rather than complete permeability. Simpson's term intersubjectivity is also used to refer to the same species influences on individual subjectivity. Bayer and McAdams' narrative identity theory is used for a base of that term to explain the place and context influences on a person, the transience, the core stability, as well as the defining role of the sense of purpose. I use the philosophical terms of hedonia and eudaimonia to describe the different qualities and temporalities described by my participants in relation to happiness. The concept of phenomenology is also employed based on Hazelberger's work, which treats happiness as a lived, first-person phenomenon rather than an abstract variable. This phenomenological lens allows attention to how happiness appears and feels in concrete situations, including bodily sensations, moods, and shifts over time. Finally, I employ the geographical term of relationality to show how happiness and all individual experiences, as well as the self, including subjectivity and identity, are ongoing and dynamic, produced through relations with people, places, and more than human environments. This moves us away from seeing happiness only as an individual psychological state toward understanding towards understanding it also as emerging from our embeddedness in social and ecological webs. By combining phenomenological attention to lived experience with geographical attention to context, psychological concepts for understanding individual subjectivity with geographical concepts for understanding place and relationality, and philosophical frameworks for distinguishing between different qualities of happiness, this research offers a uniquely comprehensive approach to understanding happiness in eco-communities, moving beyond both utopian celebration and cynical dismissal towards nuanced, contextually grounded insight into what alternative ways of living might teach us about human happiness and environmental sustainability. So, drawing from all of the above, this research was designed to critically examine the relationship between happiness and eco-community lifestyles with the intention of identifying whether such post-consumerist ways of living, which challenge mainstream assumptions about prosperity and transcend conventional economic growth, can meaningfully contribute to both human happiness and environmental sustainability. Oops, I'm missing my research questions here, but I will just read them out. Specifically, the three questions that I am looking into are first, how do eco-commoners, meaning eco-community residents, this is a term I often use, how do eco-commoners in Greece understand, seek, and experience happiness? Secondly, what is the lived experience of those eco-commoners and how do eco-communities affect residents' happiness in those places? Thirdly, what can be interpreted from eco-commoners' experiences that might influence or shape broader understandings of happiness beyond the spaces of eco-communities? So I will now briefly walk you through the research design, how and why I selected my sample, how I collected the data, and how I analyzed them, and um, what questions of positionality and ethics shape those choices. First of all, this study focuses on eco-communities in Greece, and the choice for this country context is not accidental. Firstly, Greece is the first country in the world to have fallen from developed to emerging market status, a shift associated with the documented rise in mental health problems during and after the economic crisis. At the same time, more than 100 alternative self-organized projects emerged as grassroots responses to hardship, including a notable number of eco-communities. Together, these conditions create a particularly intense backdrop for exploring how people make sense of happiness in post-consumeristic community-based lifestyles. Greece was also a pragmatic and epistemic choice, as there is almost no existing research on Greek eco-communities, and as a Greek national with prior experience and networks in these projects, I had both ease of access and a deep cultural familiarity that allowed for richer, more nuanced engagement in the field. Because eco-communities in Greece are diverse, fluid, and often difficult to pin down, I used a cluster concept to define my sample rather than a narrow essentialist definition. So, drawing on Glennie's idea about Glennie's definition of um, the, um, the theory of a cluster concept, I treated the term eco-community as a set of overlapping criteria, none of which are individually necessary or sufficient, but where satisfying an adequate combination qualifies a project for inclusion. For this study, the key criteria were, firstly, self-organization and collective action. Secondly, experimentation to address perceived problems of previous lifestyles, particularly those linked to the Greek crisis. Thirdly, economic crisis, respect for the non-human world, and fourth, incorporation of modern concepts and inventions. The more criteria a project met, the higher it was prioritized, and I deliberately retained flexibility to capture the plurality and emergent character of Greek eco-community initiatives. The sample was shaped both by my initial mapping of the field and by the unpredictable realities of eco-community life. I began by compiling an Excel spreadsheet of all projects that appeared to fit at least some of the cluster of criteria. Drawing from previous theses, word of mouth, the Global Ecovillage Network database, and general online searches. In total, I identified 73 potentially relevant projects at the time. In practice, recruitment reflected the realities of this field. Access constraints, project transients, and the pandemic context all influenced the final composition of the sample, as many projects were dismantled, inactive, unreachable, or simply uninterested in taking part. Some explicitly rejected the term eco-community. Personal networks and snowballing were therefore crucial. Trusted contacts and ties formed during visits opened doors to about half of the projects I eventually entered. The sample thus reflects not only my selection, but also who was willing and able to participate at that historical moment, highlighting the fragility, turnover, and contested identities that characterize this field in Greece. The final sample consisted of 25 projects, which is more than half of the estimated active eco-community type initiatives in Greece at the time. They span a wide spectrum of formats, sizes, and stages of development. They include long-established communities with permanent residents, newer projects still in the process of consolidating a collective lifestyle, and more experimental initiatives that combine ecological practices with looser forms of communal living. This diversity is important because it reflects the fluid, emergent character of the Greek eco-community landscape. Regarding the recruitment of participants, given the transient nature of those spaces, which I already knew from before, and the unpredictability of who would be present on site, I adopted an inclusive approach to participant selection. Everyone on location during my visit who expressed willingness was eligible to participate. Founders, long-term residents, short-term volunteers, visitors, and in some cases, previous members, reflecting retrospectively on their experiences. This produced a mosaic of perspectives across different roles, durations of stay, and nationalities. The final sample consists of 43 participants, amongst them founders and core members who have invested heavily in building these communities, long-term residents with several years of experience, and people in more temporary roles, and a small number of ex-members reflecting on why they left. This spread allows me to compare how happiness is understood and experienced from different perspectives. In practice, my research materials come from Greek founders and long-term residents who are often best placed to reflect on change over time, conflict, and the tensions between ideals and everyday realities. At the same time, though, newer arrivals and visitors contributed valuable fresh-eye perspectives, noticing aspects of the lifestyle that more established residents might take for granted. This balance between richness and spectrum wide is at the core of the sample design. On one hand, the breadth of 25 projects and the variety of 43 participants give a sufficiently wide base to make cautious claims about trends and tensions in Greek eco-communities as a whole. On the other hand, projects are grouped and ordered by degree of importance for the study, based on the extent to which they met the eco-community cluster criteria and the depth of my engagement with them. And participants are also grouped and ordered by degree of importance for the study based on the richness and relevance of the insights they provided, their role within the projects, and the duration and intensity of their involvement in the eco-community life. This breadth and variety allowed me to build a reasonably representative picture of the phenomenon while still retaining depth in key sites. Anonymity and confidentiality were central ethical commitments. All names used in the thesis are pseudonyms, and identifying details of projects and individuals are obscured where necessary to protect participants, especially given the small size of the Greek eco-community scene and the sensitivity of some of the narratives. So, data collection took place in two main phases, shaped by both the research design and the pandemic context. The first phase was from the 12th of July to the 11th of November 2020, and the second phase was from the 16th of May 2021 to the 22nd of February 2022. I used a combination of qualitative methods designed to access both what people say about happiness and how they live it in practice. 39 semi-structured interviews, one focus group, participant observations in 22 projects ranging from a few hours to 1 week, a focused immersive ethnography of 3.5 months in one selected project, 2 autoethnographic therapy sessions, psychotherapy sessions, and 10 participatory community discussions, which mostly served as secondary contextual material. The analysis followed an exploratory qualitative approach with grounded theory and feminist influences. Rather than testing predefined hypotheses, I worked iteratively between data and theory, allowing participants' accounts and observed practices to guide the development of key themes and conceptual categories. So, moving on to my findings, also conscious of the time. My central finding is that eco-communities do not make individuals happy or guarantee happiness, but they do create conditions conducive to personal journeys of self-actualization. Firstly, most of my participants mentioned that happiness is intrinsically sourced. When asked what happiness is and where it comes from, they repeatedly turned inwards, and many expressed similar views that happiness is an internal mental state responding to subjective personal cues. This aligns with phenomenological philosophy, recognizing happiness as a lived first-person experience colored by individual character. Many participants emphasize that the path to happiness is unique for each person, dependent on their identity, which includes their personality, values, needs, and past experiences. Here is where I use, as I mentioned earlier, Bauer and McAdams' a narrative identity perspective to analyze further this expressed view from my participants, where identity is seen as a storied construction that integrates past, present, and imagined futures. So across interviews, personal development is regarded as the key prerequisite to individual happiness, enabling one to understand and love their identity and guiding oneself towards a life aligned with that identity. A big range of practices that extends beyond and not just reject the psychological scientific focus on psychotherapy is mentioned. Recognizing both the transient and consistent elements of individual identity ongoing self-awareness is deemed important. Participants converge on the idea that long-term happiness is about living in accordance with one's values and purpose, echoing the theory of eudaimonia. Purpose functions as what I describe as a stabilizing filter in one's identity. Even as moods and circumstances fluctuate, having a clear sense of what matters helps them navigate choices in what they feel is meaningful. Personal development, even in the form of self-observation and self-awareness, contains contains choice and intentional engagement, and therefore is the enactment of individual agency. Several participants explicitly express the view that happiness is an individual's own responsibility, signaling away from it being a passive state or something that just happens to them. Participants clearly distinguish between moving to an eco-community as an act of escapism, which is very prevalent in eco-communities, according to the words of my participants, and hoping the place will fix them automatically, and moving there as part of an intentional process of changing how they live and who they are becoming. For them, the belief that happiness is one's own responsibility is the defining factor between these two trajectories. All of the above are exemplified in many stories, individual stories from my participants. I have a couple of examples here, but looking at the time, maybe I will move on. However, despite articulating that they consider happiness to be an intrinsic state, as described already, and even some of my participants going as far as expressing that the external conditions don't matter at all, most of my participants also highlight the desire for and contribution to their happiness of living in close proximity to nature in a close-knit human community and with more independence from the system. They speak with emotion about waking up to bird songs, sharing meals, being able to go to the garden instead of the supermarket, or no longer being dependent on a boss. This apparent contradiction, happiness coming from within, but at the same time needing nature, community, independence from the system to feel well, is analytically productive. It reveals that in practice, individual agency does not function independently of place, context, and social ties, and my participants' subjectivities are porous, and their experience of happiness is also relational. This is in line with what I presented earlier, the geographical concept of relationality, that see human subjectivity as constituted through ongoing relations with people, places, and more than human environments. Therefore, the conclusion of this main central finding is that happiness is understood as conjointly constituted experience. On one hand, there is the emphasis on inner responsibility, and on the other hand, there are the specific eco-community features. The reconciliatory understanding is that an eco-community provides the structure to facilitate dedication to personal development, but the individual themselves has to intentionally invest effort in that in order to experience happiness. The second finding is that unpacking the individual, which is the unit most important for the subjective experience of happiness, my participants' words and their observed behavior show a holistic understanding of the self that goes beyond Cartesian-inspired divisions between mind, body, and spirit. An observation that already has been made by Lifton's description of eco-village worldviews as non-dualistic and holistically oriented. The body and the spirit are understood as participating in the individual experience of happiness, even when that experience is explicitly described as a mental state. Regarding spirit, many of my participants frame happiness as a spiritual journey in which the individual holds both the power and the responsibility to shape a reality that fosters their happiness through thoughts, intentions, and consciousness, while simultaneously becoming more interconnected within the wider cosmos. By contrast, hardly any of my participants associate happiness with the body explicitly when asked to define what happiness is for them. A couple of participants talk about how emotions are felt in the body, such as tight chest, stomach knots, lightness, expansion, relaxation, and one single participant only mentioned about hormonal influences. Yet, even though across interviews and field notes, people rarely talk about the body as the place where happiness resides, their practices and narratives reveal that bodies are central to how happiness is both understood and lived in eco-communities. Their everyday lives in eco-communities are highly embodied. Many give rich sensory descriptions in their interviews, talking about the smell of soil after the rain, for example. And some of these sensory descriptions are even given as answers to what happiness is for them, questioned during the interviews. At the same time, because of all of this, the body seems to be the point of contact between the other components of the self, the mind and the spirit, with the outside world, playing a crucial role in the co-produced experience of happiness. Additionally, nearly all participants demonstrate high health consciousness, including caring for one's body as pivotal in maintaining a good relationship with the self, which I discussed in the previous finding is considered a prerequisite for happiness. 5 of my participants explicitly say that their primary personal crisis that led to their lifestyle change was health-related, such as severe health diagnoses, panic attacks, etc. Many express improvement of their physical health since arriving to the eco-community, and several praise the cleaner air, water, access to fresh food, regular physical activity embedded in everyday tasks, reduced exposure to urban stressors, and more flexible time structures that allow rest and self-care for feeling better since their translocation to the eco-community. Showcasing the feedback loop between the 3 components of the self, a very popular belief is also expressed that physical symptoms, even as part of a disease, are the body's language for communicating malfunctions in the mind and spirit. The third finding refers to temporality as a major characteristic of happiness, with short-term present elements and long-term past and future elements shown to be important in the composite final happiness for my participants. 1/3 of my participants associates happiness with moments of joy in the present. Stella's quote, sorry, okay, I think I will skip that part due to time. Observing daily practices in eco-communities confirms that this moment-based understanding is not just rhetorical. Present-focused enjoyment is a defining characteristic of the lifestyle. These findings support my use of the concept of hedonia, which I explained earlier. A similarly large number of participants, as well as the wider corpus of interviews and observations, strongly associate happiness with leading a life according to values and morals, and having a sense of purpose and meaning, which ennates past and future orientations in them respectively. This this can be equated to what I described earlier as the concept of eudaimonia, which is the long-term fulfillment. While participants express happiness being found in the present, they also tend to romanticize the past and be clearly taking actions by concern about the future. The inclusion of similarly contradicting temporal orientations result in an understanding that both hedonic and eudaimonic happiness are highly valued by eco-commoners. Some participants express views that posit a morally condemning view on joy, associating it with consumeristic gratification, which the founding principles of eco-communities are to fight against. In contrast, long-term, value-consistent happiness is often spoken of in morally positive terms as deeper, truer, and more real. However, when these moral judgments are set against other parts of the data, where the same participants openly value and pursue joyful moments, it becomes clear that they are not condemning joy as such, or hedonia, in case it's not, in case alignment is not so clear. They are not condemning it, but they are condemning specific sources of it that they see as tied to consumerism. So basically, they are advocating for sources of joy, such as watching the sea, listening to music, sharing time with loved ones. Um, these forms of joy are considered integral to their happiness and are also obvious in the way that they go about activities to satisfy their needs, which I will explain more in the following finding. At the same time, the essence is that too many sacrifices of joy for the sake of the bigger picture. So for what they perceive as their purpose do not lead to happiness, but instead to a life that feels dry, exhausting, or martyr-like. This equal importance can be also supported by research already existing that explains how intertwined our recollections of the past and hopes for the future are with how we are actually feeling at the moment. So my fourth finding has to do with happiness as the satisfaction of needs. Several participants explicitly associate happiness with the satisfaction of their needs, but they radically reconceptualize what needs are and how they should be met. Rather than assuming a wide range of wants, my participants talk about reducing, clarifying, and reordering needs, often in direct critique of consumerist norms. Interview excerpts, daily observations, and the founding principles of the projects all show this insight, echoing eco-commoners' identities, core values. Participants disagree on whether this reconceptualization of needs stems primarily from an improved relationship with the self, or whether the act of changing how they meet needs reshapes that relationship, which actually proves further my main finding about the co-constitution of the experience of happiness between an individual and their surroundings. All the values associated with happiness, with a strong emphasis on freedom and drive for more simplicity, are considered to be finding expression in the paradigm of self-sufficiency. The self-sufficiency dream, which involves, as many of my participants describe, escaping the system and risk society, living simply and practically with low impact, characterizes most eco-community projects in Greece. This is not unsurprising, as many were established during the period of widespread systemic disillusionment as the country was undergoing its infamous economic crisis. More than half of my participants explicitly mention some version of self-sufficiency as a central motivation to translocating to an eco community. For Greek participants, this explains why they did not follow more common responses to the crisis, such as immigration abroad or conventional agrarian careers. Um, Although most projects still relied on making an income, using money, doing food shopping, etc., and even arguing over it, which makes clear the illusion or ambiguity that my participants live in of getting out of the system, there has been some clear positive effects on their sense of happiness. More simplicity, less stressors and mainstream life distractions, as well as more time for reflection and mindfulness, has been expressed by some participants. This indeed enables nurturing of personal development efforts and other benefits on the mind and body from practical work. The belief they are leading an example of living out of the system and having a choice in a time of systemic failure is also adding to the eudaimonic effect for them, a theme expressed by some and generally observed, especially true for the Greek founders that are motivated by impacting societal change. Moreover, the words a handful, sorry, from about a dozen of participants can be used to paint the image I observed of the typical daily life in those projects and how it diverges from the mainstream in incorporating more moments of joy. The doings in the Greek projects are described to be characterized by enthusiasm, creativity, participation in learning, work as play, being childlike in daily life, sharing moments of laughter and good hanging out, having fun and celebrating life together with others, working with nature, and seeing that they are having an impact. In this way, the satisfaction of needs become a primary site where hedonic joy and eudaimonic meaning intersect. A romanticization of this lifestyle is being made by my participants in their words and from my observation, which leaves out the hardship and trade-offs accompanying this choice. Firstly, I experienced the culture of ableism. Secondly, confinement in financial sources and options in general, which create an atmosphere of dogmatism and exclusivity, is something I observed. The power dynamic plays a role here, as those struggles are primarily expressed by other volunteers, like was my role there. The founders struggle more with the bigger picture of long-term sustainability and survival of the project. These struggles, I believe, do impact on the experience of joy when saturated. Yet I conclude it is the strong sense of purpose and morality, as well as the satisfaction from perceiving this lifestyle to be aligned with their values, that at times propels voluntary discounts in its coverage and romanticization instead of acknowledgement of struggles. The difficulty of flourishing amongst projects in Greece, with several dismantling and a high turnover of volunteers, including a very limited presence of Greeks, contrary to reports from the time of the crisis, put into question the notion that this lifestyle is easy, as many of my participants describe. Um, According to my participants, the self-sufficiency way of need satisfaction is only enabled through the empowerment of the collective and the reconceptualization of the relationship with materiality by moving away from the city lifestyle, which are the next two final findings. Okay. So firstly, living in community, a need for more connectivity, and the vision they believe they can accomplish through it are the key romantic ideal motivations behind embracing living in community. The wish to be together and not be alone echoes findings already sorry, I think I will skip this part because of the time. Um, at the same time, what community and eco-community mean remains hazy, with views differing over intentionality, duration of relationships, power tied to land ownership, and the role of kinship. Participants consistently emphasize that human relationships are the most difficult part of eco-community life to get right, and yet they also uh, they also see this as the most crucial for experiencing both hedonic and eudaimonic happiness. I saw this by introducing three principal characteristics of community life that affect happiness. Firstly, living in proximity, people share space, sound, chores, and rhythms, creating what I interpret through Pyle's concept of emotional spreading. Moods and tensions move quickly through the group. Secondly, the intensity of relationships, shaped by the immediacy of the lifestyle, the small number of people, and their like-mindedness. This intensity is also noted by other eco-community scholars. And thirdly, the tension between individual and communal needs. Uh, Within this relational configuration, my participants articulate very diverse relational needs. Some seek deep, solid, long-term bonds. Others value more transient connections, romantic relationships, intimacy, and conditions for child rearing are all discussed. Eco-community life offers rewards, but also strong challenges, which may help explain the ephemerality of many young people's stays. In line with existing literature, my finding confirms substantial individual benefits from togetherness, such as support during crisis, feeling held, shared problem solving, and the comfort of not facing difficulties alone. I add to this by highlighting hedonic benefits that are less emphasized in the literature, such as shared laughter, play, celebrations, everyday conviviality that people describe as beautiful moments of happiness. However, these same conditions also generate conflicts that significantly affect eudaimonic happiness. Proximity, intensity, and the individual collective tension mean that small disagreements can escalate quickly, and participants report fatigue from repeated conflicts, unresolved grievances, and power struggles. The impact of conflict on individual happiness is rarely centered in eco-community studies. Uh, Yet in Greece, where turnover of projects and participants is high, it emerges as a major factor shaping whether people live or stay in a project. Stories of projects dismantling due to interpersonal fallout circulate widely, functioning almost as cautionary tales. Despite broad recognition that relationship quality is the greatest challenge, many projects continue to prioritize practical outcomes, building, land work, income generation over time, and energy devoted to eco-community building and conflict resolution. Um, this mirrors dynamic of capitalist society where productivity often trumps care and reveals a failure of the utopian ideal that community will naturally take care of itself. It also aligns with observations that the pragmatic pressures of survival restrict opportunities for experimenting with relational practices. Contrary to romantic expectations that relationships are different in eco-communities, many of my participants conclude that conflict and connection ultimately come down to individual skills. This could be read as another form of individualization, but my data nuance this. Eco-communities are in overall understood as providing conditions that accelerate personal development in relationships. Several participants state that although painful at times, this lifestyle has forced them to confront patterns they might have avoided in the anonymity of a city and has fast-tracked their learning about how to live with others. The final finding has to do with the element of relationality from the previous chapter. That in the previous chapter, in the previous finding, I discussed in relation with other humans, and here, in a microscopic level, connectivity with more than humans and the spiritual realm can be explained through the description of the affective interactions, which I use the theory of phenomenology to describe. In a microscopic level, it can be explained through the universal interconnections in the collaboration with non-humans. The desire for the self-sufficiency vision and the grasp of the relationality in their own subjectivity is what is leading participants to seek to live in close proximity to nature and develop an intimate relationship with it. Connection is the overarching theme for the effect nature has on the individual happiness. This connection with nature was prevalent before this lifestyle choice for many of my participants since childhood. Humans and everything else are interconnected as part of ecosystem cycles where one action can affect the balance of the whole ecosystem. Both humans and non-humans are capable of agentially affect and be passively affected, with human actions being mostly morally just and non-human ones only reacting to that. There is a respect towards nature stemming from its sacralization for most participants, associated with both the wild landscape and the daily co-creational doings together with nature. The majority of participants are coming from urban backgrounds and tend to romanticize nature and contrast it with the city. The city is seen as a symbol of capitalism, construed to be unnatural, inhumane, and fake, with slaving conditions that leave many needs uncovered and making its inhabitants more vulnerable to times of crisis. Nature, on the other hand, is perceived as a more optimal habitat, which results in a more satisfactory percentage of needs coverage at the same time as giving us freedom from the dependency on the money system. Like the perception of the back to the land trend in Greece, which is already shown in Benesaia's research. In reality, Greek projects are satellites around urban projects, and both safe distance and proximity not urban projects, urban centers, and both safe distance and proximity to them are highlighted as benefits. My participants have an expanded notion of community that includes the whole universe and experience the same feeling of belonging they do with the immediate human community. They are grateful towards nature for providing the perceived conditions for optimal health and for the inspiring sensory stimulation. That gratitude and the respect they have for nature inspires ethics of care and a sense of purpose and becomes a moral compass for them. Affective sensory interactions with nature have a particularly positive awakening effect on the body and spirit, combined with the fact that nature is part of their identity. This allows participants to connect with themselves. None of the possible drawbacks of the remoteness of this lifestyle, such as difficulty in access to medical assistance and the threat of the wildfires, are mentioned in the interviews. In the contrary, the lived experience of being close to and collaborating with nature appears to be reinforcing the romantic pre-notions and expectations my participants had before embarking on the community lifestyle.
Dimitra, I was just wondering how much longer, because it's been 60 minutes. It'd be nice to have a bit of time for questions.
Yes, I just I saw the time. I can cut off here or have a couple more minutes to summarize things.
That would be great. Thank you.
Shall I cut off here then?
No, sorry, just to summarize it. That would be lovely. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, no worries, no worries. So just to summarize, how eco-commoners understand, seek, and experience happiness. is characterized by importance on individual agency, a spiritually colored worldview, embodiment, hedonia and eudaimonia, um, the satisfaction of needs, the inclusion of relationality, and phenomenological experiences. Um, so, how the lived experience of those eco-commoners and how do eco-communities affect residents' happiness in those places? I have shown that there are three key characteristics of the eco-community lifestyle. The first one being self-sufficiency, the other community, and the third one being nature. And these characteristics um, are intertwined, and um, they are stemming from certain values associated with happiness, which I already discussed, that eco-commoners have and seek this lifestyle that supports them. What I have also shown is that often this differs from the reality of experiencing this lifestyle. And as I analyzed in the presentation of the three findings, there seemed to be a lot of romanticization in the expectations they had of the lifestyle before and what they experience after. Um, so finally, my last research question, what can be interpreted from eco-commoners' experiences that might influence or shape broader understandings of happiness beyond the spaces of eco-communities? I have shown that happiness cannot be reduced either to individual psychology or to structural conditions alone. Both, both levels matter and are co-constituted. Individual uh, cultivation, including personal development practices, reflexivity, and above all, awareness, is central to how people experience and interpret their lives. At the same time, place, laws, culture, socioeconomic and environmental conditions, including capitalist crisis and the climate emergency, profoundly shape what kinds of lives are available and what forms of happiness can be sustained. So, eco communities, um, eco com- the insights into different aspects of lifestyle that contribute to happiness from eco communities are also showing which happiness qualities are missing in conventional lifestyles. Such as, for example, time for personal work and reflection, purpose beyond economic productivity, um, joy, care for bodies and spirits rather than constant overwork and neglect, positive sensory inputs from nature and human physical contact, freedom and simplicity, contrasted with the dense interdependencies of risk society, the money system, and bureaucratic constraints, environmentally ethical behavior, togetherness, mutual support, and a sense of being held by a community. At the same time, the thesis is clear that eco-communities do not create perfection and utopic conditions do not exist. Um, Recognizing this guards against romanticizing eco-communities and against blaming individuals when reality does not match the ideal. Finally, happiness is shown to be aligned with values within enabling structures. Um, so there's not a one-size-fits-all ideal of happiness. And as I said before, it's very important. Um, it's very important recognizing that different individuals have different ideals, but at the same time, structures can feel constraining or misaligned for different people. I think I can cut off here.
Thank you ever so much, Dimitra.
You're very welcome.